So welcome to ENSET podcast. So where we dive deep into technical technologies and career insights. Uh, I am Ashraf Hardizi, a co-lead of the Google Developer Group uh, on ENSET Mohammedia. And today we have a special guest, someone who's been on the forefront of web development and a big contributor to Astro. So
Yeah.
please welcome Elian van Cutsem.
Ooh. Hi.
So, Elian, it's a big pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you
So,
for having me.
so for those who may not be familiar with your work, could you please introduce to us how you got into web development and how you've discovered Astro and start
Ooh. Yeah.
contributing?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So hey, hello. I'm Elian van Cutsem. I live in Belgium. I'm a Belgian developer. And basically, well, right now I have multiple different jobs. I freelance most of the time. I'm working at Vulpo, which is a local tech company here in Ghent, where I live. And next to that, I'm also the lead developer relations at React Bricks, which is a CMS company for React, of course, hence the name. So yeah, I've been in tech for I would say almost 10-ish years. I started slowly discovering HTML and CSS when I was in high school. Built some websites, just basic HTML, CSS type, not really JavaScript. Then I discovered WordPress because I wanted to host some websites and stuff. But of course, you know how WordPress is. It's kind of difficult to either you just install a theme or either you play around with PHP all the time, which I started doing and then learning about databases and everything. So then, in once the time came for going to university, I decided on becoming a web developer because it looked really awesome. I enjoyed my time in coding. Um, so I started working in web development, and my first years was mostly PHP and Vue, a little bit of Nux, but not really the full stack frameworks yet. And then once I got an internship, I started working my internship here in Belgium, in Ghent as well, um, where I was writing a paper on web performance. And because at that time I was super interested in Jamstack websites, which I don't know if any of you know what that is, but basically static websites as we know them now. Um, and I was using Nux 2 at the time. And comparing the differences between how Nux worked and then sites like 11T and Gatsby and everything like that. And I found out that actually none of the solutions that really existed out there were common knowledge, worked out for me. Um, they were shipping too much JavaScript that I didn't need. I basically wanted to write my website in JavaScript, but still compile out HTML and CSS. And that is, funnily enough, exactly the time when Astro started to kind of appear, like pre-alpha days. I think it was version 0.14, 15, like not too much. So I joined their Discord and I started chatting with the maintainers of how does this work? What does it actually do? How does the compiler work? Can I help you guys out? And then I started speaking at local communities, just like this one. And I thought, hey, maybe Astro is a good uh, topic because nobody knows about it. It's still very new and it has some interesting ideas that I haven't really heard before. Um, so I started speaking, public speaking about Astro. Um, and from one thing came another. I started working in the documentation as well, making contributions to the framework and everything like CLI. I can remember. I remember building the marketing page in a 404 page and stuff. And then suddenly came a day that I was asked to become a maintainer. And once I was a maintainer, I was still working at my local company with other technologies. And then on the side, I was doing a lot of Astro work, going to a lot of conferences to speak about Astro because I found it such an interesting technology. And then maybe a year into being maintainer, I was asked to become a core member. And then I worked for a year in the core team, improving several stuff, mostly in the developer experience team, where I did documentation, the theme generation, and all of that stuff. Really interesting and fun work and awesome colleagues and everything. And then it came my time to find something else. And so now I'm back to being a maintainer. So I still work on Astro in general. Mostly my contributions right now are non-code contributions, as we call them, which is documentation, translations, just being there in the community, being a voice somewhere, engaging in discussions, doing podcasts like this, because that's what I love. So I think that's in
Yeah.
short my story.
Yeah, so you talked about doing conferences. So for
Hmm.
those who doesn't know, I've met Elian when he was doing his talk on React Remix in Casablanca in Morocco. So
Right. Yeah.
basically, he gave his talk about Astro, where it was Astro, all secrets revealed.
Yeah.
He gave pretty much all the thing you should know about Astro to get started and start doing Astro. And the good
Yeah.
thing about this is that he inspired me actually to do a talk about Astro on Mixblabla community. For those who doesn't know it, it's
Awesome.
a Moroccan community, and it was pretty good. It was a very good experience. So I would like to thank you
Awesome.
for inspiring me actually.
Yeah, of course. That's one of the things that I love about my job. It's not just being there in the tech community, but it's also working with them and inspiring people and helping people. Because like human connection is the most interesting connection, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah, true, true. It's all about having like it's all about meeting new people and try to like
for
discover
sure.
new perspectives and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Elian, we will start like with the basics. So,
Mm,
what's Astro and why it's gained so much traction in
yeah.
nowadays web development?
I think, in short, I would describe Astro as a static site generator. Well, it used to be, it does way more, but it's a full stack framework, just like Nuxt or Next or Remix. You know, probably a lot of them. But Astro kind of takes things in a different approach. By default, every web page that you will have built with Astro, you can build with React on top or with Vue on top or both of them next to each other. We call that island. So we have an island architecture, which basically means that you have Astro as your foundation of your website, and then you add building blocks of, in this case, React on top as client islands. And those client islands can be hydrated as well, but can also be at build time statically compiled to just HTML and CSS, web native stuff. So in my case, for instance, how I discovered it was I was just building a portfolio website, and there is nothing really dynamic about a portfolio website, right? It has some
Yeah,
documents, maybe a blog, and maybe some links to projects you've done. Why would I need so much JavaScript to render that website? It's basically HTML and CSS. That's all I need. Um, and the thing about Astro is that even though I can write that experience for me, like as a developer, I can write it in JavaScript, but still have the performance gains at build time and then statically host it, even on an FTP server if I want, which is crazy. For instance, on a typical portfolio website, the only real interactivity that you need is the menu button on mobile phones. That's it. Everything else is basically static. So with that client architecture that Astro has, we can just select only that button and only ship JavaScript to that button, and everything else can just be statically outputted, which is a really interesting technology idea. That's why I also fell in love with Astro. Yeah,
true. It's fascinating. Actually, this is one of the things that people love about Astro. So, it's
yeah,
island architecture. The
hmm,
fact that you can only select components that will be interactive.
yeah,
So, one thing that confuses me a bit is that I don't know, like, what's the main difference between partial rendering in Next.js and like the
right.
difference in server island island architecture in Astro. So
Well,
it's
there is a
confusing
couple
me
of
a bit.
differences. Yeah, the thing is, the idea is the same. The execution is vastly different, but that doesn't matter too much because as a developer, we at Astro, I think, mostly believe in we should do it for you. We should give you the tools to do it, and we will optimize it on our end as much as we can. Same with client islands. Like you always start natively with a static website, which is the most performant web can be, right? Because it's static, there is nothing, and then you add complexity layers on top and on top and on top. So when I speak about Astro, like the technology wise configuration, it's an opt-in configuration, so you opt into different features, whereas typical other frameworks approach it differently and do it opt-out behavior. So they give you all of these tools, and because of that your website is less performant because you have so much JavaScript that you don't need. You might not even need those functions, so why should we ship them to you? You don't need them. So Astro does that differently. Like for instance, one of the cases is the partial pre-rendering and the total server-side rendering and hybrid rendering strategies that we have. It's all a configuration option. It's never there by default. Um, but yeah, you mentioned an interesting thing because, for instance, Astro has Astro Actions, which is not entirely the same as Form Actions in React, but people kind of expect it to be the same because always well, all frameworks do this, and that's perfectly normal. I believe that's even a good thing. Is we take features from each other. We see that, oh, maybe Nux has a really cool feature. Maybe we need that in Astro as well. So let's port it to Astro and then rebuild it from the ground up and again and again. But then you start having confusion in the wider community about people not knowing what exactly is the difference in between both.
Yeah. So since you've mentioned that islands give you a big flexibility in working with your project, so you can make
Mhm.
it interactive.
Yeah.
So you can also make it dynamic. So this is one of the misconceptions that people have about Astro. It's only for static websites,
Yeah.
but you can actually do like dynamic
Yeah.
website side rendering. It's
You can do even
fine.
more. You can even host a full SPA, like a full Create React app, fully
Yeah,
inside of an Astro component if you wanted to, because it's just JavaScript. Yeah.
yes. So by default, Astro uses like static rendering. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Well,
and
actually, it changed a little bit, and it used to be always static first until Astro 5. And in Astro 5, some things, but it's a small tweak that you won't notice by default. We have something called the hybrid rendering strategy, which basically is still static by default, but you still get an option to pre-render certain pages or opt out of that pre-rendering pages. So it will server side generate one page and everything else on build time. So it changed a little bit, but it's true that it was very much a misconception. Well, it is very much a misconception that Astra is mainly for static sites, or what used to be for just only static sites. It's not. You can do a lot with it.
so Astro moved into server side in what
Astro
major
5.
change? Astro
Astro
5,
5. Yeah.
where it introduced server islands.
Well, yeah, server islands as well. Well, server islands were, I think, stable kind of already in Astro 4.19, like somewhere the later versions of Astro 4. Um, Before that, it used to be experimental. But yeah, in Astro 5, it's there. Yeah.
Yeah, basically in Astro 5, the Astro launched so many powerful features. Among them, so we've talked about server islands. There was also content layer API.
Yeah.
So where it enhanced the performance of managing content. So can you
Yeah.
talk us a bit about this?
Yeah. Content is a super interesting story in general for Astro. Like Astro, since it was a static site generator by default in the beginning, it always needed to have a good content story. Like, why would you want to manually write HTML kind of pages? Like Astro has JSX like language to define your models and pages. Um, but probably that's not the best case for a blog. If I'm writing a blog, I don't want to write my H1s manually, my P elements manually. That's a little bit annoying. Um, what we wanted is something where you could write Markdown, but still generate out the HTML in the end. So Astro invented in Astro 2, invented something called content collections, which basically would split up your content in Markdown files, where you can still type safe check the front matter, what we call it. Um, so what it basically did was, hey, I have a collection of Markdown files. Those are my blog. And I have a collection of Markdown files for these pages, which are my portfolio, for instance. And now they will automatically transpile to a queryable collection in HTML, which was super handy and useful. And one of the reasons I also like loved and started using Astro a lot for like blogs and portfolios and marketing pages is because it's super easy to edit. Like Markdown file is so much more easy on the writing side of stuff than HTML is. Um, so that was already a super interesting story, and it became even better in Astro 3 and 4 because it became faster and optimized way more. And then we did the type safe checking and everything. But in Astro 5, we saw that there was a lot more to do with collections, and that's not just Markdown, but what if we could take any resource and put it into a content collection? And that's what we call the content layer API. And the idea, I must say, and that's totally fine as well, is kind of stolen or used, reused, and re-implemented from Gatsby. Um, and what that basically does is now, hey, I have a CMS where I host my content and I want that into my Astro website. Now you can just fetch that API and put that in the same kind of content layer or in the same kind of content collection idea. And now it's suddenly a queryable collection with with type safe checking, with maybe Markdown. You can choose whatever you want, and that's super interesting about the content layer API. For instance, one of them that I really found interesting and I use is I have a content collection with my images from Cloudinary, and that's just a content loader. So basically, I can define it, I can check it all in my Astro files, and then magically at build time, it will output all of the things I need.
Sure. Actually, that's the thing. Since you brought that it was inspired from Gatsby,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
I've tried to create a blog with Astro and Gatsby, the same blog.
Yeah.
So I took what they call like the team from Astro that
Yeah.
gives the 5 blogs by default, and
Right.
I
Yeah.
tried to build the same one with Gatsby. I gotta say.
It's a different
Uh,
experience.
yeah, the fact that you have in Gatsby to work with GraphQL to like
Yeah.
work with
Exactly.
content was a bit
Yeah.
harder since you have to learn GraphQL. It's a a
Yeah.
new thing that you have to add to in order
And the
to
thing
work
is
with it.
also
But
that,
in Astro, it's super easy.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's what we value a lot in general at Astro is just developer experience. Like everything should be easy to implement, and you should read the feature and it should basically, you should write it out by magic in your hands because it's so easy to understand what's happening, right? For instance, one of the things that I really loved about Astro when we came up with the system of Astro add command. So you want a database or you want a React layer upon your Astro, you can just type Astro add React, and it will automatically download the right packages, update your config files, maybe your TS config. So it's a super interesting way of making it easy for the developer to actually build a system because it's just easy. Yeah.
And that's actually what I love about Astro. So in 5.0, among content layer server islands, there were also type safe environment variables and
Yeah.
also Vit6 integration.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
also
Um,
there was also pre-rendering, like a simpler approach to pre-rendering.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So
Like the simpler approach to pre-rendering is what we talked about earlier. That's the
yeah,
hybrid theory that's now happening by default,
yeah.
which is a really good and interesting thought, I think. And yeah, the variables, the content, well, the .env variables that are type safe, but also server side safe, so you can define which ones should be only on the server and which ones can make it to the client. So it's always where they can be. Um, it's still in experimental, so it's not stable yet. It probably will become stable in some minor release further down the road. We just released Astro 5.3 yesterday, which also had some better performance improvements for Vite. Yeah, and then we launched Vite 6 because Vite 6 is way faster than Vite 5, and Vite 6 became stable. And once Vite 6 became stable, Astro 5 was released. Basically, we were waiting on Vite 6 to become stable to call Astro 5 stable as well.
And there were also like more experimental features like SVG components, image
Yeah,
cropping.
yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, Astro
there's
has a
also
real taste for building a lot of experimental features, and then whenever they are stable, they will just make it into the next minor release. Yeah.
there was also one question actually that was from the community. So from Yusuf
Ooh.
Amzad, which is a member of the community, where he said like us junior developers and students, we mainly want to contribute to our favorite like framework, to our favorite language, and
Hmm.
but we don't have like the not the knowledge, but the requirements. We don't know how you can contribute to like a project
Yeah.
that is open source.
It's funny. I get that question a lot. Like, how can I contribute? And it depends on which project. For Astro, I can say the most useful contributions are actually no code contributions right now. For instance, translations. We have websites that need translating. For instance, the documentation of Astro, it has a lot of languages. I think 13 or something like that. It's super useful to get integrated, and also because when you're translating stuff, you're also like thinking about the language, how it's written. You get to know the framework in a way deeper level as well. Um, so I think that's always my main option to go. And otherwise, it's also speaking and talking about Astro, because by speaking of Astro, like we're doing right now, you're contributing a lot to the framework, like getting it known, getting it out there. It's super important to have that and to do that. Um, And next to that, it's also like feature discussions. Astro has a thing called RFCs, which is basically a request for comments. So people can basically ask for new features inside of Astro. And when a core member comes in and asks like, "Hey, why do you want this feature to be implemented?" There is an open call for people to discuss that. And I think that's also a good way of chiming in, like, "Hey, what features are upcoming for Astro, and what features are being written right now in Astro? Why is this still not stable, and when will it become stable?" All of that is like discussed in our GitHub. Yeah, so definitely those three are kind of the way to go, I think.
Right. So there was also another question that
Mhm.
also brings interesting subject. So we say that Astro is a meta framework
Yeah.
that lets you use any front end framework on your Astro project, like React, Svelte, Vue. Uh,
Uh,
but the thing isn't that like micro front end, or
Not
it's
really.
not really?
Not really, because micro frontends is more combining different frameworks in the same context and sharing stuff among them. Astro, you can technically do it in Astro, but it's not what it basically does. Astro just he's a framework agnostic tool, which means that you are not using you're still using the framework, but it's just a base layer on Astro. So no, I think it's vastly different than micro frontends. Also, state management across all of those frameworks in Astro is quite hard to do. You can do it with something like nanostores, but it's not the advised way of using Astro. Typically, I say to people, like, if you really have to use different frameworks in an Astro project, you need to have a very good reason. And mostly that reason is we're migrating from, for instance, SvelteKit to Astro with React. But in the meantime, we can still use Svelte components because they still have to be rewritten to JSX or something. Um, so yeah, I don't think it's a very good use case for micro frontends in general.
uh, there was also one thing that I wanted to share with the community. So, when I've first worked with Astro, it's true that I
Mhm.
thought it's a static site generator since
Of
I've made
course.
my portfolio with it.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, it has a very good teams. You gotta check it out. The themes on Astro are super cool, super pleasant. So,
Hmm.
like, you gotta check it out. And there is one question in the chat. Is in the Astro, the SEO is out of the box or required for extra effort?
It requires extra effort because Astro is the tool, um, and it's not it's not a traditional framework in that sense. So if you want to do your SEO in React, for instance, then you have to use head or whatever that React hooks provide for you. But you can totally write it in HTML, like the meta tags that you usually would use. So out of the box, no, it doesn't really do SEO. What it does have, Astro in general, it's a very open system. So people can build plugins or can build packages, and you can just use them in your project. So it definitely exists. I know there exists like a couple of solutions out there, but out of the box, it doesn't. No,
And it performs well
it performs
since
very well. Yeah, for sure. Hmm.
I've seen the benchmark on the official page of Astro.
Hmm.
It shows like the benchmark between like modern frameworks like Next, Gatsby,
Hmm.
and if I remember, like the Lighthouse performance of
Yeah.
Astro always hits around
By default it
80%.
yeah,
Yeah.
by default it will always be very high. Like, also, that's the thing, it basically uses browser native languages, right? It starts with HTML and CSS, and then you start building upon it. So by default you'll always score higher than a website that, for instance, like Next, by default ships a lot of JavaScript that's unneeded in a way. So yeah, it's not an apples to apples comparison, I guess, but yeah, it is a very performant framework for sure.
Mm, there is a question. Are there any limitations when using React in Astro compared to standalone React app?
Well, the architecture is different. Astro is by default server-side rendered or generated, whereas React, sorry, or a standalone React application in Vite is always an SPA. So it's different. The architecture is basically multi-page application versus single-page application. You can totally run a single-page application inside of Astro but then you're just writing React. So is there a limitation? No, you can totally do it. But the thing is always use the best tool for the job, which might not always be Astro in this case. For instance, I built a project at work, and the best use case was to use Laravel with Livewire. So if that's the use case, then use whatever you need. There is always different tools, and they compare all different in some ways. So use the best tool for the job.
Yeah, so you always have to think of your needs and
Yeah,
try to find the best solution for it.
yeah, totally.
So Elian, for those listening who wants to get started with Astro, what resources would you actually recommend for them? Like any favorite guides, tutorials, and
Well,
or
actually, there is only one really recommended resource that I always give, and it's just the Astro documentation. The Astro documentation is written phenomenally well by Sarah, well, who's leading the docs team and guarding it very well. It's amazingly written. It's very comprehensive. It's also very searchable, and Astro also has like a step-to-step beginning guide, which guides you through setting up your first Astro project. And of course, we also have starter kits. Like you can just start a new Astro project, which has by default Tailwind CSS and a blog system, so you can play around and use those. So I always recommend to go to the official docs first. But of course, if you are a visual learner and you rather see people using it, there is a couple of good channels out there. Like Chris Pennington has an amazing channel with a lot of Astro content. And I think by now there is a lot of tutorials out there. There's of course also like my talks, which you can always refer to. There is a lot of things out there, but yeah, official documentation first, for sure.
sure, guys, just check Alien Talks. I've been watching them for for a million times. It's super
Yeah.
useful, and as I told you guys, it's what inspired me to actually start diving deep into Astro.
Yeah, which is amazing. I'm super happy about that.
Me too. So, when we've talked about server islands.
Yeah.
Uh, in the documentation, there's something that looks similar to React Suspense, which is the new feature that React came with.
Yeah. Mhm.
Uh, it's very interesting to see like the similarities and
Yeah.
some of the ways it's been developed.
What I always explain it as is it's basically HTMX inside of your Astro site. It does exactly the same idea. So technically what it does, it puts a promise on the server and puts a fallback in your code. And then whenever the promise is fulfilled or your API is fetched on the backend, it will just swap out the HTML with the new HTML, which is a very performant way of actually having a full page rendered already, so way faster, and then loading dynamically in the content, which is always more performant than it would be in the case of using a client island. Yeah.
And so like it's a good way to improve like the initial page load
Hmm. Hmm.
if I understood
Yeah,
so good.
exactly. Yeah.
So, Alien, I would say that it was fantastic to see you on the show.
Of
I've
course.
learned a lot. It's super useful for anyone who been on the podcast. Sorry, uh, check out his website,
Sure.
and we'll see you guys again on another show. It's been fantastic. I've learned much. And Elian, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Yeah, of course. Thank you
So
for having me. I really enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
thank you all for tuning in. So and see you on the next one.
See you. Bye.
Thanks.